Evidence of God. Told to you by the person who lived it, Esther Luttrell.
Episode 4.
Tom Mock. He is an author and he's also a journalist and a literary critic. But he, too, has had his share of dark places. Knowing that I was writing this book, he sent me the following email. Let me quote it for you. One evening, I sat on a sofa in my San Jose, California home, and I was devastated because I'd been unemployed for several weeks. I was quite discouraged, and I cried in despair over my situation. Suddenly, I heard a voice say, "What do you want, my son?" And I answered that I wanted a job. The next day, I received 2 phone calls from 2 different companies offering me a position, end quote. So how can I not quote Matthew 7:7 again? Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. I'd been working at CBS for, about 3 months, but my salary was so low it was all I could do to pay rent and buy groceries. Well, despite the fact that I loved the job, and I really loved everything about it, including the few people in our tiny basement department, but I really needed to earn more money. I woke up one morning and I lay there thinking over my situation. Where, I asked myself, would I work if I had my choice of any place on earth? Well, without a moment's hesitation, I whispered aloud, MGM. All those years of traveling, all those years of not knowing how to make friends meant that I gathered up every bit of what I knew about life, about relationships, from what I saw on the movie screen. I guess Mom and Dad wanted to enjoy a bit of alone time because once in a while they dropped me off at whatever movie theater was around in whatever city we were going through. Movie houses opened their doors back in those days around 10 in the morning, and they played one movie, a cartoon, and a newsreel over and over until it was time to close. You could actually pay one fee, get one ticket, and spend the entire day watching the same picture show. Well, I was so tiny, I had to stretch up on tiptoe to take my ticket from the lady in the box office. Daddy, well, he would ask her what time the last feature ended, and that's when he said he would pick me up in front of the movie house. Well, clutching enough coins in my fist for a day's worth of popcorn and several packages of cherry lifesavers, I joyfully bounced into the theater to begin my marathon lesson on life. Daddy, he would actually make an unscheduled stop if, in driving through a town, he saw a June Allison movie. He would say, "Come on, Old Sweet Eyes is playing, and I know where Monkey Face wants to spend the day." June Allison was Sweet Eyes, and I was Monkey Face, a very happy Monkey Face. Now, here it was, many years later, and I was asking myself where I'd love to work more than any place on the planet. Now, still in pajamas, I turned to my bedside phone and I dialed information for the number of MGM studios. Once the switchboard answered, I asked for personnel. Summing up the experience, it was Tuesday when I made the call, and it was Thursday when I reported for my first day on the job. I gave notice at CBS that very afternoon, and I received a huge hug of congratulations from my boss as he wished me all the best in my new position. Like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, I was off to a wondrous new land. MGM, the place where June Allison starred in all of those wonderful old musicals. I walked along the very streets she actually walked along. I could hardly believe my good fortune. Movies were no longer what they used to be. It was the end of an era. Television reigned supreme, and several shows were filmed on the studio lot. In fact, Michael Landon's Little House on the Prairie, his office was downstairs from mine when I worked on the Eric Estrada series Chips. Well, before that, I was assistant to music editor Bill Saraceno. He had started his career as a 17-year-old, helping his music editor uncle work on Singin' in the Rain. And Cary Grant, he was no longer making movies, but he was on the board of directors, and I saw him several times in passing. Even at his age, I think he was, maybe in his early 80s, but he was gorgeous. Drugs, they were around then, but I was too naive to recognize them. My first week at the studio, an executive asked if I'd like a Quaalude. Well, I smiled my very best June Allison smile, and I said, "No, thank you. I have chiclets." I thought he was offering me a breath mint. Oh, gosh. To walk into Los Angeles, and with my limited education, land jobs at CBS and then MGM, it really was God in evidence. And every morning as I crossed the back lot on my way to my office or whatever soundstage I was working on, I thanked him with every ounce of my being. And I have to share with you the real miracle of that whole experience. When I went to work for Chips, Larry Luttrell, the location manager I later dated, he called me into his office to introduce me to his assistant. "Esther," Larry said, indicating a rather familiar-looking young man sitting at a desk across from his, "I'd like you to meet Richard Powell." That was June Allison and Dick Powell's son. God led me to MGM, where I landed a job with absolutely no effort on my part. And here I would be working with the son of the woman who had meant the world to me all my life and who was my role model, my inspiration. What blessed years at MGM. God is great, and God is good, and God is in evidence. And by the way, no, I never met June Allison. I just wouldn't have known what to say. I'm reminded of Psalms 37:4. "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." In my own words, ask God for whatever your needs may be, and thank Him that your prayer is heard. Larry Luttrell, well, he became my best friend. You see people in every kind of mood and situation when you work with them 10 to 14 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week. The entire film production team, we work through Santa Ana winds, earthquakes, monsoons, and union strikes. And we relied on one another. We trusted one another. We shared most of our waking hours together. Although I'd been divorced for more than 9 years by that point, I had come to love my life. So accepting Larry's proposal 3 years after meeting and working with him, it really didn't come easy. I prayed about it. I talked to Dean about it, and then I prayed some more. And looking back, I realized that I was still looking for a home. Once again, God was not in on this man-made decision of mine, despite my prayers. Oh, he nudged me plenty of times, but I found a way to justify the midsection punches. They were not nudges that said, go, go, go. They were nudges that said, no, no, no. But I, unlike the wise whale and dolphin, did not pay any heed. I swam straight for the underwater obstacle, and I didn't marry a man I loved. I married my best buddy. I did vow to be such a good wife that our marriage would last forever. You know, even when we're stubborn, even when we defy God's prodding and his directives, he never leaves us. There's a funny little story I like to tell. It illustrates our human stubbornness. When Dean was just a little toddler, he was hardly able to walk. He came into the kitchen where I was at the sink. In the kitchen was a door that led to a flight of rickety stairs going down to an unfinished basement. And I kept that door locked, of course. Well, I heard Dean straining and grunting from behind me, so I turned, and I saw that he was stretched up as far as he could reach, trying desperately to get to the doorknob. No, no, honey, I said. Can't go in there. Well, Dean threw me a sideways glance that just reeked of toddler disdain as he continued his determined struggle to open that door. No, darling, I said with a bit more force. Well, this sweet-faced little tow-headed child who had never had a temper tantrum in his life, he let out an ear-piercing wail as he threw himself on the floor, and he commenced kicking his feet and pounding his fists. What an outburst! Well, I crossed my arms over my midsection, and I walked over to look down on my thrashing young son. He wanted to go through that door. He was determined to go through that door. He had no idea what was on the other side, but he was certain that he needed to find out. I, on the other hand, being wiser and knowing what was beyond the door would be hurtful for him, had to say no. I loved him so much that I let him scream and cry and have a conniption fit. That's when the thought crossed my mind. So this is what I look like to God. How many times have we wanted to go through a door that was closed to us? And how many times did we scream at God to let us through? When we still didn't get through, even after repeated pleading and prayer, we complained to others that God didn't answer our prayer. Well, of course he did. He said no. Being wiser and knowing that what is on the other side of whatever it is we think we have to have is not in our best interest, we fail to realize that our Heavenly Father is protecting us from hurt. He loves us so much that he says no. He says no when our prayer or desire is not in our best interest. If you're willing to acknowledge that you are God's child, you will be received. And as God's child, he will justly reward you according to your works. But he also will let you know when a lesson is to be learned. I used to be really bad about casting myself in the role of enabler. At some point in my life, I got it to my head that I knew what others needed, and it was my job to see their every dream came true. When I was 12 and living in a trailer with my parents in Montebello, California, a husband, wife, and their 13 children were in residence in a tent pitched in a vacant field less than a quarter of a mile from our own vacant lot. We were one of the very few families to have a TV set at that time, and a scrawny little boy from the tent clan, and his name was Arthur. He was barefoot, hair uncombed, undernourished, and always with a runny nose. He knocked on our door every evening around 5 or so, wanting to watch his favorite television show, Howdy Doody, and also Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. They were the most popular children's TV programs at that time, so I think it was one of those. Anyway, he'd sit on the floor, staring up at the TV screen in utter fascination. I, on the other hand, was fascinated by this raggedy little boy with the runny nose. I stared at him as intently as he stared at the TV. I don't think I ever heard the child say a word. I'm not even sure he could talk. Well, Mama seemed to know from the very first what the little boy wanted, and she would open the door for him. Now, my mother, as you know, was not all warm and fuzzy where children were concerned, and I don't recall her ever offering him milk or cookies, but she didn't mind him taking up space cross-legged on the floor for half an hour every evening. Daddy had said that Arthur and his siblings slept on army cots in the tent. I don't recall anyone ever taking them food or really helping in any way except to let Arthur watch TV with me. Well, one night, as I was listening to a radio program in my bedroom, I heard an announcement about a national contest. Well, my ears perked up when the announcer said that first prize was a pony. So I grabbed paper and pencil and I scribbled down information on entering the contest. And my heart was thundering. I would enter this contest and I would pray so very hard to win, and I would give that pony to Arthur. So after sending in the brief original essay that was required, I prayed every morning and every night that the poor family in the tent would be allowed to get that pony. Well, weeks went by, and I kept praying. And sometimes I was so intent, my face would get all screwed up with emotion as I implored, "Oh, please, Lord, please, please let me win the pony for that snotty-nosed little boy. I mean, he's never had anything nice, and it would be so wonderful. Oh, please, God, let me win that pony for him and his brothers and sisters." In my very immature 12-year-old head, my prayer was a good prayer, and it needed to be answered. And it was answered. God said, "No." On the night the winning name was to be announced on the air, I sat beside the radio, so nervous I could hardly breathe. Fingers on both hands were crossed, and I clutched them to my chest, and I raised my face to the heavens. "Oh, please, 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 God." And God said, "Nope, not this time." My heart sunk when my name wasn't called as winner of the coveted pony. Why didn't he let me win that pony for such a needy family? How could he be so cruel? Why didn't he hear me? God did not let me win that pony because, being older and wiser and loving me and Arthur's family very much, he knew what I asked for was not in their best interest. It'd be years later that I realized what an absurd prayer I'd offered up to my Heavenly Father. Why, that family could hardly feed themselves. How would they have been able to take care of a pony? They lived in a tent. Where would a pony live? So a pony would have been a burden, not a blessing. Never doubt that God answers prayer. He just doesn't always answer in the way we think he should answer. He does, however, answer in a way that's best for all concerned. Neale Donald Walsch's book, Conversations with God, it became so popular that a movie was made of it. However, it's the backstory I find more interesting than the book or the film. Even as Walsh was writing, he was going through some really difficult times, and at one point was living in a park with a number of other people who were homeless. It was a kindly and wise black man who took Walsh under his wing and helped him through that harsh period. When Walsh's manuscript was accepted by a major publisher, and he was paid a tremendous amount of money, his very first thought was to share his wealth with the homeless community that had befriended him. And he wanted to do something for his black benefactor in particular. Well, as he approached the park, he was no doubt as excited as I was when I was sure I was going to win that pony for the poor family down the road. There is something really glorious in being able to give to someone who truly needs it. The feeling of joy, I think, far exceeds the joy we feel when we're on the receiving end. Well, to Walsh's great disappointment, the park had been cleared of the homeless. City officials had cleaned up the neighborhood, he was told, and no one really knew what became of the vagrants. So Walsh drove around in despair, searching for those he was now in a position to help, but he had no luck. So why didn't God let him give them a hand? The subject came up one evening in a group discussion at a church I was attending at the time. Why, they asked, wasn't Walsh allowed to give them money or a place to live or food or whatever they needed? Why did God ignore his prayer? Was I the only one who saw clearly that God was telling Walsh that by helping, there are little air quotes there, helping them, he would be keeping them from their own growth? There were lessons in the lives of each individual that could only be learned by having their own experiences. But perhaps their lesson was one of faith, or maybe they were to learn patience. The point is that Walsh was being told to let God do his work without interference. I wanted to play God to the poor tent family. I wanted to give them their needs, which my 12-year-old self was sure was a pony. Walsh wanted to short-circuit whatever lessons were to be learned by the individuals who had lived in that park. And as disappointing as it was for me, as disappointing as it was for Walsh, as disappointing as it always is when a good-hearted soul wants to give so much that they become an enabler rather than a blessing. We have to know when God has work to do and when we need to back off. This is so true of women who are married to abusive husbands and friends and family of those who are addicted. They want to give and give until the people in distress no longer want to do the thing that's destroying them. But in giving, they're keeping the one they want to help from learning the tough love lesson that God imposes so that they might be strengthened by their experience. If we will think back, we realize that we ourselves have grown in faith and have become stronger because of adversities we faced and overcame. A helping hand is not the same as taking on the entire burden of people's challenges and solving their problems for them. For years, I thought the quote, "Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime." I thought that came from the Bible, but it's actually a Chinese proverb, one of which I feel certain God approves. And that, of course, reminds me of a Bible verse, James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." Dear Lord, I realize that I've been an enabler and not a blessing by trying to do your work. I vow to release the troubled person I thought I was helping, and I promise to leave it to you to show them the way to their spiritual growth. I don't want to leave without thanking the men that you heard on this program today. That was Patrick McGranahan and Jack Diamond. Also, the musical stings that you heard. Those were composed by Fesliyan Studios, David Fesliyan, Steve Oxen, and David Rinda. I hope you'll click on this subscribe and the like buttons. That's what makes it possible for us to continue to bring you these kinds of programs that I do hope you're enjoying. There are 24 chapters in all, so I'm looking forward to you coming back and maybe listening to the rest of them with us. Till then, thank you, and God bless.
This is Jack Diamond inviting you to soar on the wings of imagination.